latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Amy, you know what you call a putt you leave way short? No? Hello? All right. I guess she doesn't want to play after my Kardashian. All right. We have to discuss more serious matters, including the predictive performance of our economy. This is what Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, had to say on CNBC about this adjustment period as we get off the junk, we get off of government spending, and we make room for private sector investment, real growth.
Top 10% of Americans are 40 or 50% of consumption, and that is an unstable equilibrium. The bottom 50% of working Americans have gotten killed. We are trying to address that. We're trying to get rates down, and could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure. And look, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending. The market and the economy have just become hooked. We've become addicted to this government spending, and there's going to be a detox period.
So that's one matter. The other being tariffs. Trump sat down with Maria Bartiromo yesterday and had this to say about the grace period that he offered, thanks to pleading from the automakers, pushing off tariffs he was going to impose on Europe, Canada, Mexico, until April 2nd. But they are coming.
But we may go up with some tariffs. It depends. We may go up. I don't think we'll go down, but we may go up. But they have plenty of clarity. They just use that. That's like almost a soundbite. They always say that. We want clarity. Look, our country's been ripped off for many decades, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore.
On the tariffs, what are the automakers going to do for a month? I mean, you say you wanted to help American automakers.
Yeah, I did.
You spoke with the three.
It's a transition period.
Okay.
And it's a transition into April. And after that, I'm not doing this. I mean, I told them, I said, look, I'm going to do it this one time, but after that, I'm not doing it. They called me and they wanted help during this little transition period, and I gave it to them.
For more on this and the implications, James Perry, founder, CIO, Perry International Capital Partners, joins us. Jim, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning.
Morning. You know what you call a putt that you leave way short, right?
I don't know. A plastic pot that needs to be watered by somebody who gets paid a lot of money.
How about, have you heard, they call it a Bon Jovi? Because, do you get it?
Sort of.
Halfway there. Bon Jovi, leaving it way short.
Living on a prayer, yeah.
How about when you blow your drive past somebody else's drive in your group, call that a Linda Ronstadt?
Why?
Okay.
Blue Bayou. See? There's so many.
Wow. You play way too much golf. I have a soccer joke for you. Do you know why people play soccer?
No.
So they don't have to watch it. Hey-o.
Yeah. So they can bite testicles. All right. Jim, you don't have to. We're dragging you down into our nonsense.
You were on it today, man.
We were having some fun before the break here, before you joined us. Now we have to get serious. All right. So you've heard Treasury Secretary Bessent say, "Look, we got to get off the dope. This is this phony economy pumped up by funny money. There's going to be a transition period as we sort of rebalance the situation and try to generate real growth by getting government out of the way and letting the private sector do what it do." What say you?
Well, he's right, but the question is, the people that hear him really don't want to hear it. I mean, his metaphor about the junkie and, the getting off the dope and detoxing, quitting smoking and quitting drinking and doing drugs is really hard for you, I think, right? I don't do any of those.
It is for me.
Sport, but yeah. But,
especially the drugs.
Who wants a scolding from a public official about, being more, I don't know, balanced with your health and your life? Nobody wants to hear that. They want to get the money, right? So the blowback against the government is like quite obvious. It's like people don't want to be told that they got to quit spending money and quit receiving money and quit working because they're not doing anything. They just kind of want the status quo. And I think this whole Trump administration, Bessent being right there and Rubio and all these guys, they're preaching to a choir that really doesn't want to hear the music at all. They're angry and they're brushing back, and the markets don't like it,
Well, the markets don't like it, but the flip side is, at least right now that could be fleeting, but right now, Trump has popular support, and in part because once you start detailing all of the silly Marxist frivolities we're spending all kinds of money on, people are understandably react. Well, that doesn't seem like a good use of money, and so he has support to do a lot of what he's doing. The question just then becomes, how long is this adjustment period, as they're calling it, between reconfiguring the economy to be more private sector centric and less government centric? How long till we see the sort of economic growth that calms people down and says, okay, well, now we're in a better place?
Yeah, you're right. I'm old enough and have read enough history economically to remember, Ronald Reagan when he was bringing, nuclear warheads over to Europe, and Paul Volcker when he was raising interest rates and crushing the economy. These two guys were highly unpopular, yet everybody knew that to win the greater war, the greater good, we had to, in the Cold War, stop Russia, and then in the inflationary period, when Volcker started raising rates, we had to get inflation down. And now, the big boogaboo is spending. And, not to beat a dead horse, but, the government brought in $5 trillion last year in taxes and spent $7 trillion, deficit being $2 trillion, right? And pre-COVID, in 2019, the government brought in $3.5 trillion and spent $4 trillion. So the budget deficit was $500 billion, and now it's 4 times that. And it's just, if we keep doing this, the country's going to collapse. So, it's harsh medicine, and you got to take the drugs away and go through a detox period. But it's going to be painful. There's no question about it.
Well, how long is this sustained pain going to last?
Well, what does the pain look like? What is it? When you say painful, what do you mean?
Well, you're talking about a redistribution of the labor force. There's not that many government employees in the country, so that I really don't think the disruption in the labor force is going to meaningfully change the growth trajectory of the economy. But when people say, "Oh, I'm getting laid off by the government and I don't know what to do," it changes sentiment, right? So that's a big problem. And when they say, "Well, the agency that I'm working for is going to be disbanded because the government doesn't like the Department of Education anymore, therefore they must hate kids," people react viscerally and negatively, and they don't like it. So I think, when's the stock market going to go down, and when's the economy going to stabilize?
Yeah, that's sentiment stuff. People are there's not going, outside of the Marxist members of Congress, nobody's going to be holding big rallies for the workforce at USAID or the Department of Education. At the end of the day, people care about their jobs and their household income, and they don't care very much about anybody else's. So I just don't. So consumer sentiment based on government layoffs, I don't know if I buy that. But what I do buy is inflation that stays high, that's sticky where it is now, or even ticks up. Interest rates, and as you were talking about, sort of the investment that drives real capital, capital formation and job creation. So so your perspective on that, are we on or is this inevitable? Is this going to be exacerbated by Trump's tariffs, depending on how that plays out? Could it be ameliorated by his tariffs? I mean, how do you see this potentially going one way or the other?
Inflation is a tricky subject, and it's highly understood. It's a rate of price increases, and it's the aggregate price increases, right? So inflation in this country has never been higher, right? And this is before Trump even got reelected. And only government creates inflation, and that's money supply, you know? I mean, the GDP of this country, the growth is $30 trillion, right? And money supply officially is sort of $21.5 trillion. But if you take into account the sort of $3.5 trillion of cash that the Treasury's got ready for disposal, money supply is kind of $25 trillion. So, you know, deficit spending and money supply is stimulus, and the fact is that is how inflation is created by any government in the history of the world. So inflation, if spending is not cut, inflation will keep rising, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody feels it. This is why Trump was elected. As far as tariffs are concerned, half the economists that I talk to out there are convinced that tariffs are inflationary because clearly consumer prices will rise if the price that we impose upon Chinese imports go up by 20% or 25%. Walmart will charge you more, and you'll have to spend more for a coffee pot or something like that. And I suppose that's true if you just look at one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is that, you know, you look at China, and you and I have talked about this, but they've got something like 400 million people working in factories, manufacturing goods for export to the West, right? And those prices of those goods are going to go up. So China has two choices. They can either cut the price and keep people employed, or raise the price to American consumers, which they will not use and they won't buy it anymore. And then all of a sudden, you've got 100 million angry Chinese people unemployed, and you've got social unrest in China. So I don't really believe the inflationary component of the inflation argument is as valid as many smart people seem to believe.
What do you want to say to people who claim Trump is mismanaging the economy? People who are frustrated when they go to the grocery store.
Well, prices have been rising, Amy, for 4 years, and really more like 14 years. And I think that the reason prices are rising is because of the regulation on the delivery of goods and services and the amount of money that the government is spending. And when the government hires a lot of people and buys a lot of product, that means they're competing with the private sector, so the private sector has to raise its prices to compete. And I think that if people really looked at it, they would recognize that as a consumer, the private sector things that they buy, they have to compete with a government that doesn't care about higher prices. So I think everybody recognizes that if the cost of government, if the trajectory of growth and the size of government comes down, inflation will fall. But, you know, how do you say that to somebody at the grocery store paying $8 for a dozen eggs? You know, it doesn't really compute, right? They're more emotional and saying, this has got to be somebody's fault. Let's blame who's ever in charge or whoever's on TV. So this is going to take some time, right?
I mean, if we get an extension of the Trump tax cuts with the add-ons for overtime, Social Security tips, and we see something approximating a balanced budget for this fiscal year, meaning they've reduced spend by, let's say, Musk's target $1 trillion in whatever is proposed later this spring. Then even if you have tariffs artificially high because the reciprocal tariffs haven't gotten us to lowering to both sides, all sides, lowering barriers to open markets to respective countries' goods. The dereg and the reduction in spending and the tax relief alone, is that enough to at least have us crawling along, holding serve, or maybe even a little bit better? Or is are we on the cusp of some real headwinds?
I think the transition period, Dan, is going to be tricky, and I think that the tariff story is much more complicated than sort of a headline that you can read in the Wall Street Journal. I think the idea that tariffs are actually going to be imposed upon our neighbors, Mexico and Canada, and our closest allies in Europe, I think what Trump's trying to do here, to be honest with you, is to recognize that to slow the Chinese state-sponsored mercantilist economic export juggernaut, you are going to have to put up a wall and say tariffs in Europe, Canada, Mexico, Commonwealth countries are going up 25%, because all the stuff that you're exporting to the States and used to export to the States, and now it comes through Vietnam and Mexico and Canada instead, it's the same problem, and we are still abetting your expansion. So I think the tariff story, and I was golfing with a guy that was a Canadian guy last Thursday, and he says, Fortress North America would be a great idea. If Canada and Mexico can get on board with the United States and slow China down, everybody wins. And I said, that's right. The big picture here is, what do you do about a China, which is a state-sponsored communist party that wants to continue to expand its influence around the world? You have to slow them down, which means tariffs. Cut them down on oil. Iranian oil, Russian oil to China, cut it. Exports through Vietnam to Mexico and then to here, cut it. Toys and Barbie dolls through Vancouver into Canada to Chicago, cut it. So I think everybody eventually is going to get on board, but, it's not going to happen overnight, right? It's just not going to. But I think everybody recognizes and can see that the end game is much more important than the here and now. So we're going to slow down here in the next 3 months or 6 months. And eventually, once people recognize that the government budget deficit gets cut by $1 trillion, and things are getting better and prices are going down, they'll be happy. So right now, I wrote this in my report last night. The bond market gets it. Why do you think 10-year Treasury notes are trading at, essentially 4.25% rather than 5.25%? They've rallied since the inauguration, 7 weeks in a row, and down from about 4.80. So the Treasury bond market is telling you that inflation expectations and the trajectory of the growth in them are flattening out and falling. And I think eventually the stock market and the economy and the consumer, that egg buyer at Walmart or whatever, will eventually see that.
Jim Perry, founder, CIO, Perry International Capital Partners. Jim, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Tim, thank you very much. Amy, thank you. Have a good week.
You too, and he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You never want to miss one of life's most important moments. A graduation, a birthday, a first communion, a wedding. When these moments happen, you want to make sure to capture them so that you and your loved ones can remember them for years to come.